Okay, so let's get into this. It's a really disturbing situation that happened down in Marion County, Florida.
Yeah.
We're going to dive into these police interviews. This is from March 2023, and what comes out is just it's a horrifying story. Starts with just complete confusion.
Well, that's what's so striking, right? That initial picture is just total uncertainty.
Mhm.
You get a 911 call, a girl bleeding in the road,
Yeah.
and the caller sounds, completely panicked,
Yeah.
has no clue what happened. It's just this one single alarming event that then just spirals. It gets way more complex, way more tragic pretty quickly.
Absolutely. And this young woman, she's identified as 16-year-old Lila Silvernail, gunshot wound. And the confusion just gets worse because the 911 caller is relaying what his neighbor heard.
Right.
Loud crash, like a car slamming into their dumpster. Then 2 gunshots and someone running away from a car. It's just, it's pure chaos in that snapshot, isn't it?
It really is. And it immediately makes you think someone's frantically trying to escape, maybe trying to hide something.
Right.
Yeah. These fragments, these details, they point to something sudden, violent, not like a planned, methodical thing.
And then the very next morning, literally just blocks away, another body, also shot. And this is when the worry just skyrockets for Leah's friends, especially this other 16-year-old Camille Quarles. She was a runaway, apparently staying with Leah, so now it's clearly not just one isolated thing.
Exactly. That link between Leah and victim number 2, it immediately broadens the whole scope of this tragedy. And like you said, Camille being a runaway, that adds this layer of vulnerability, right?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Maybe makes, less likely someone would immediately report her missing in a way that triggers a huge search,
God, you can only imagine the fear spreading through that community. Camille's aunt, Amy, she was just desperate for answers from the police, understandably.
Of course.
And this part is chilling. The rumors at school, the grapevine, it was already buzzing that Camille had been shot too. This is before the police had even confirmed it. How does that even happen? How does that leak out?
Yeah. That's deeply unsettling, isn't it? That kind of premature knowledge spreading around the school.
Yeah.
It really suggests that people who knew something, directly or indirectly, were already talking, maybe hinting, maybe saying things outright before the official investigation even caught up. It just shows how urgent it was for the detectives to find and talk to the people closest to these kids.
It really does. And thankfully, Leah's best friend, Gabby, she gave them some really crucial early leads.
Okay.
She told detectives what Leah was up to that day. She was with her boyfriend, 17-year-old Michael Hodo, Camille, of course, and a couple of others, known only as Rob, and this 12-year-old kid nicknamed 35. Suddenly, these nicknames become vital.
Right. Those are the first threads, aren't they? The names, the nicknames, that's what investigators have to pull on.
Yeah.
Gabby's account starts painting that picture, the social circle, who was with Leah right before everything happened.
Yeah.
And including someone who's only 12, that's immediately alarming, raises huge questions.
Right. And those nicknames, they quickly led police to 17-year-old Robert Robinson, that's Rob, also known as Reaper. Turns out he was already in custody for something else.
Oh, wow.
And the 12-year-old Christopher Atkins, that's 35. Now, because they're minors, their mothers, Erica and Ashley, they were there for the police interviews, which just sets the stage for these incredibly intense and often totally contradictory stories we're about to unpack. Having the parents there adds a whole other layer, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's such a complex dynamic. You've got the kid maybe influenced by the parent being right there. You've got the parent reacting disbelief, maybe being protective. All while the detectives are trying to carefully pull out the actual truth from what's about to become this tangled web of stories.
Okay, so Chris, the 12-year-old, he starts off telling the detective this story that just immediately sounds fake. Something about eating, watching TV, hearing a noise, and then just going back to sleep. It's completely detached from the horror they're actually investigating. Why do you think someone does that? Go to that kind of detached story.
Well, it often feels like a defense mechanism, right? That sort of rehearsed, emotionless story, especially for a child in that kind of incredibly stressful situation. It could be a way to try and control the information, maybe distance themselves from, incriminating details, or just the sheer emotional weight of it all, trying to create normalcy in a situation that's anything but normal.
And the detective, he doesn't buy it. He pushes back, tells Chris straight up that Reaper, Rob, has been way more forthcoming and is basically pointing the finger right at him.
The classic technique.
Yeah, it's a calculated move, right? Trying to break down that wall, that pretense, and get to what really happened. What makes that kind of direct confrontation work?
Well, by showing that discrepancy, saying, hey, your story doesn't match his, The detective creates immediate pressure, mistrust.
Mhm.
It makes Chris feel like maybe others aren't backing him up, makes him feel isolated. And that increases the chance he might just ditch the fake story and start telling something closer to the truth.
Meanwhile, you've got Rob's mother, Erica. She's there. And she just cannot believe her son could be involved in a murder.
Okay.
Although, interestingly, she doesn't really deny he might be involved in other stuff, like theft or robbery they mentioned. It's kind of striking how people can compartmentalize like that. What does that kind of selective belief tell us?
That kind of selective disbelief.
Yeah.
It can be a parent trying to reconcile the image they have of their child with these horrific accusations,
Yeah.
Maybe acknowledging the smaller crimes feels more psychologically manageable than accepting their kid might be involved in murder. It's like reducing cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
Trying to make it make sense somehow.
And Rob himself, in his first statements, he names other people who were there. Landon, and this girl nicknamed Sosa, who we now know is actually Leah's boyfriend, Michael Hodo.
Okay, so he's giving up names, but maybe not the whole story.
Exactly. But then, as the interview goes on, the detectives hit him with CCTV footage. It shows him outside his house after the time he claimed he was already home. How big a deal is that kind of objective proof in an interrogation room?
Oh, that's huge. Objective evidence like CCTV, it's incredibly powerful. It just blows a hole right through their alibi,
Right.
removes any doubt about whether they were telling the truth on that specific point.
Yeah.
And that can just shatter their overall credibility, makes it much easier to challenge on everything else they've said.
Totally. And his own mother even tries to get him to cooperate at that point. But Rob, he's clearly terrified of being called a snitch. It just highlights that powerful code of silence, doesn't it? So hard to break. What are the things driving that whole no snitching culture?
That no snitching code, it usually comes from a really complex mix of things. Fear of retaliation is a big one, obviously, but also loyalty, maybe to a group or just the community you're in, and often a deep distrust of the police. In some places, cooperating with law enforcement can mean getting shut out socially or worse, actual physical harm. So people are just incredibly reluctant to talk, even if they're facing serious trouble themselves.
But then this is where the whole investigation just takes this really dark, unexpected turn. During Rob's interview, totally out of the blue, he says something like, tease kid all three of.
Wait, all three of?
Yeah. And this is before the police had even told him that Camille was dead. They only knew about Leah and the second body at that point.
Whoa.
And it turns out Ty's kid is likely this other 16-year-old Taj Bruton. He was actually on the run, had cut off his ankle monitor. How did Rob know about a third victim before the cops confirmed it? That feels like a massive slip-up.
That is. Yeah, that's a critical moment. Him just spontaneously mentioning a third victim, especially before it was official news, it strongly suggests he has direct knowledge of the full extent of the tragedy.
Exactly.
In naming Ty's kid, likely Taj Bruton, it just solidifies Rob's connection and brings in another key player they need to look at. It's a huge sign he knows way more than he was letting on initially.
Absolutely chilling. Okay, so now the investigation's trying to piece together who did what. Chris, the 12-year-old, he eventually gives a more detailed story. Says Reaper, Rob, knocked on his window, wanted to go see some girls.
Okay.
They meet up with Leah and Michael in Leah's car. Chris even describes the seating, Leah driving, Michael in the passenger seat, Chris and Rob in the back. But then he throws in this mysterious figure he keeps calling X-Man.
X-Man.
Yeah. What's the immediate effect of bringing some unknown person into the story like that?
Well, introducing an unknown figure like X-Man, especially someone supposedly in all black with a ski mask, it's kind of a classic move if you're trying to shift blame, isn't it?
Seems like it.
By saying this anonymous guy did the violent stuff, Chris is trying to distance himself. Maybe suggest he was just a witness or forced into it. The ski mask just adds to the mystery, makes it harder to pin down who this supposed third party is.
It definitely feels convenient, yeah. But Rob's story starts filling in some gaps, maybe. He reveals they picked up Taj Bruton soon after meeting Leah and Michael.
Okay, so Taj gets in the car.
Right. And almost immediately, according to Rob, Taj starts talking about knocking off someone for weed and money, which strongly suggests robbery was a motive, at least for Taj. How does that fit with finding multiple gunshot victims?
Taj talking about robbery right away, that gives a potential reason for the initial meetup or what maybe started it.
Right.
But jumping from robbery to murdering 3 teenagers, that's a huge leap. It suggests either the robbery went completely sideways, catastrophically wrong, or maybe there were other things going on, other intentions that led to that kind of extreme violence.
So
Detectives would be digging hard into that escalation.
exactly. And here's where the stories just completely collide. Taj claims Rob was the one orchestrating everything, threatened to kill them all if they didn't go along.
Okay.
But Rob insists Taj was the instigator, the one pushing it. It's the classic blame game, right? You see it all the time. What are investigators even looking for when they get two stories that are just polar opposites?
When you've got conflicting stories like that, investigators hunt for the points where they actually do agree, the convergence points.
Okay.
And then they zero in on where they differ, the divergence. They analyze those inconsistencies to figure out who might be hiding something and why. They also look really hard at which story lines up best with the physical evidence, the objective facts.
And that conflict extends to who shot Michael first. Chris says the white guy. Michael was shot in the head, close range. Taj claims Rob shot Michael. I mean, regardless of who pulled the trigger, the result is just devastating. You can't even imagine the pain for Michael's father hearing that news.
Yeah, the specific detail of who fired that first shot at Michael, it's less critical than the agreed-upon fact that he was murdered.
Yeah.
The focus for the police would be understanding the whole sequence, establishing everyone's role. But the human cost, the tragedy for Michael's family, is just immense, undeniable.
And the brutality just keeps going. Chris recounts how, right after Michael was shot, the gun was immediately turned on the white girl, Leah.
Okay.
Rob confirms Leah was shot, probably in the head. Taj, again trying to deflect, claims Rob shot Leah in the back of the head, but only after Taj's own gun supposedly malfunctioned. It's a horrific picture no matter whose version you're hearing.
Right. Even with the different accounts of who did exactly what, the consistent part is that Leah was also shot and killed. It confirms the outcome for her. And Chris's detail, that she had no time to react, no time to defend herself, it just underscores how sudden and violent it was. Just the callousness of it all.
So then the question is, what happened next? The bodies, the car. Again, total mess of stories. Chris says the car kept going, hit that dumpster after he jumped out, but then he got back in because he was scared.
Okay.
Royleb claims he jumped out because of all the blood, and that Taj then threw Leah's body out of the car, moved Michael's body later somewhere else, and just drove off. It sounds like pure panic and desperation.
Yeah, these different stories about what happened right after the shootings, it just speaks to the chaos, the panic that must have taken over.
Absolutely.
Everyone's actions are probably driven by just that primal need to get away, avoid getting caught. The differences in their stories reflect their own viewpoints and probably their attempts to make themselves look less involved.
We do have that bit of corroboration, though. The neighbor who saw the car hit the dumpster and saw a man running away. That seems to fit with Chris's story of jumping out and maybe getting back in.
Right. That witness account helps anchor things a bit.
And Rob claiming Taj drove somewhere else to dump Michael's body. Well, they did find drag marks near where Michael's body was eventually located, so that lends some weight to Rob's version there. Physical evidence often becomes the key to untangling these knots, doesn't it?
Exactly. Physical evidence, like drag marks, it can either back up or contradict what people are saying.
Yeah.
It gives you objective data points that aren't, biased by fear or self-preservation like the testimonies are.
And then Leah's car, it turns up at a lake, an incredible 52 miles away from the scene.
52 miles.
Yeah. Taj claims Rob ordered Chris to wipe down the car for prints and throw phones into the lake. Phones later identified as Michael's and Leah's.
Okay, trying to destroy evidence.
Right. But Chris denies ever being near the car at the lake, which is weird because only the front half of the car was submerged in the water. Someone's clearly lying there. Why only submerge part of the car?
Finding the car that far away, it absolutely points to a deliberate attempt to hide evidence, make it harder to connect the car back to the crime scene.
Makes sense.
Taj's story about wiping it down, ditching the phones, that's all about getting rid of forensics, stopping the victims from being ID'd or tracked easily. Chris denying it, even though the partial submersion suggests someone had to drive it in, that makes him look even more suspicious regarding the cover-up. Maybe the partial submersion was just rushed, or they got spooked. Hard to say.
But the horror isn't over. Camille's body, she's found in the trunk of Leah's car, 2 days after Leah herself was discovered.
In the trunk? Oh, no.
And she'd been shot twice, confirms it wasn't accidental, she was deliberately killed. And unbelievably, Camille's aunt, Amy, she apparently already knew her niece was dead by then, which just shows the complete chaos and communication around this case.
God, finding her in the trunk, that's just chilling.
I'm
Truly tragic end. Shot twice confirms it was deliberate, violent, and Amy knowing already. It highlights just how much distress and confusion the families were going through, with information, real or rumored, swirling around outside official channels.
And predictably, the stories about how Camille was murdered are also contradictory. Chris says Rob shot her twice after opening the trunk.
Okay.
Taj claims Chris shot her once after flipping the back seat down, and then Rob shot her again, basically to make sure she was dead.
Jesus.
And Rob actually backs up Taj's version. He points the finger at Chris, 35, as the one who shot her first, in the trunk. It's just this sickening cycle of accusations, everyone trying to pin it on someone else.
These conflicting accounts of her last moments, they just show the utter callousness and their desperate attempts to dodge responsibility for this final horrible act. The blame shifting between Chris and Rob just highlights the complete lack of morality here.
Then a search warrant at Chris's house turns up firearms.
Wow, the guns.
Yep. Chris claims Reaper, Rob, told him to hide the guns. He even suggests that the gun X-Man, the mystery shooter he invented, supposedly used, was one of those guns found at his house.
Trying to tie it back to the fake story.
Right. Meanwhile, Rob's earlier story about having sold his gun the day before just completely falls apart. The police tell him, no, we have that gun.
Oof. Caught in a direct lie.
Exactly. And with multiple shell casings found at all the crime scenes near Leah, near Michael, near the car, the lab tests on these guns become absolutely crucial.
Yeah, the discovery of the guns at Chris's place ties him directly to the weapons used. His claim about Rob telling him to hide them looks like obstruction. Rob's lie about selling his gun just destroys his credibility further. The ballistics, matching the casings to those specific guns, that has the power to definitively show who fired which shots.
So the detectives then really focus hard on Chris, pressing him about shooting Camille in the trunk, telling him the evidence is piling up against him.
Turning up the heat?
Yeah. And eventually, Chris cracks. He admits Rob forced him to shoot Camille, said Rob threatened to kill everyone Chris knew if he didn't do it, and crucially, he finally identifies X-Man as being Rob himself.
Wow, okay. So he drops the X-Man story and implicates Rob directly.
Yeah, it's a huge turning point. The whole fake third-party shooter thing collapses.
That confession, driven by fear and the weight of the evidence, that's a massive breakthrough. Identifying X-Man as Rob dismantles that deflection attempt and points directly back at Rob for the violence.
Rob then spins a kind of similar story, but flipped. He claims Taj made him participate, threatened to kill Chris if Rob didn't comply.
Passing the bucket game.
He even admits holding a gun to Leah's head, but claims it just misfired. But then Chris makes one final, absolutely chilling confession. He says he shot Camille once because she was still alive and would snitch.
Oh my God.
And then Taj, who Chris calls Stavo, sometimes shot her again. It's just a horrifying admission of a calculated killing to silence a witness.
That final confession from Chris, it reveals such a disturbing level of cold calculation. Admitting he shot her to stop her from talking. It just underscores the complete disregard for life here. And implicating Taj in the second shot just adds another layer to who's ultimately responsible for her death.
And those ballistics reports, they come back. They confirm matches between shell casings found at the scenes and the guns recovered from Chris's house. The science seems to be lining up with at least parts of Chris's confession now.
That ballistics confirmation is critical. It provides that objective link, corroborating parts of Chris's story and tying the guns in his possession directly to the shootings. It strengthens the case and gives a much clearer picture of who had the weapons.
So what about the motive? Taj kind of vaguely implies it was a robbery gone wrong, but the detective sounded pretty skeptical about that being the whole story.
Yeah, robbery feels insufficient for this level of violence.
Right. Then this whole mystery element of KTM comes up. At first, Rob tries to brush it off, says it's just a game. Then he lists nicknames of members, but noticeably leaves out Leah, Michael, and Camille.
Interesting omission.
But then, a close friend of Michael's, talking anonymously to the police, reveals KTM was actually a gang. Described it as having a cutthroat mentality, all focused on getting money. This adds a whole potential new dimension, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The emergence of KTM as a possible gang provides a much broader context. That cutthroat mentality focused on money, it lines up with Taj talking about robbery, but suggests maybe something more organized, or at least a shared mindset behind it all. It raises big questions about gang dynamics and how they might have fueled this whole thing.
So after these incredibly long interrogations, like 8 hours each for Rob and Chris, the aftermath is pretty significant. Chris's mother, Ashley, she actually gets arrested on an old drug warrant after she turned herself in just to be with Chris during the questioning.
Wow, okay.
And the charges laid against these three, they are extensive. Taj is looking at 3 counts of first-degree murder, robbery with a firearm, tampering with evidence including that ankle monitor, carjacking, assault, grand theft auto.
A heavy list.
Rob faces similar charges: 3 counts of murder, armed burglary, stealing a firearm, petty theft, robbery with a firearm, tampering. And Chris initially was charged with 1 count of murder for Camille. Later, he got an additional battery charge while he was locked up, though some of the other initial charges were dropped.
So they focused the murder charge on Camille for him.
Seems like it. All 3 have pleaded not guilty. The trial is still ongoing, so the full truth, and actual justice for Leah, Michael, and Camille, that's still being determined.
Yeah, the extensive charges really show how serious the crimes are and how much work went into building the case. And the ongoing trial just highlights how complex the legal path is to get answers and accountability.
So when you step back and look at this whole just deeply disturbing case, several things really stand out, don't they?
Definitely.
The ages, first off. Everyone involved, victims and accused, so incredibly young. It's shocking.
It really is. Teenagers caught up in extreme violence.
Then you have the constant shifting stories, the contradictions, the blame game.
Yeah, that web of lies and half-truths.
The sheer brutality of what happened, the potential role of this alleged gang, KTM.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's still not fully resolved in the courts, it's a truly unsettling picture.
And what becomes so clear is how that initial fog, that confusion, it's slowly, horrifyingly lifted.
Yeah.
The layers of deception, probably fueled by fear, by self-preservation. They gradually peeled back to reveal this absolutely tragic sequence of events that just wiped out 3 young lives.
It really forces you to ask, doesn't it? What does a case like this tell us about the kinds of intense pressures, the dangers that some young people are facing in their own communities?
That's a huge question. It really makes you think about all the factors that might contribute to this kind of extreme violence among kids.
Yeah.
What role does the community dynamic play? Lack of opportunities, the influence of groups like this alleged gang, what creates an environment where something like this can even happen?
And on the other side, how can law enforcement possibly navigate these incredibly complex situations? You've got minors, you've got these tangled, conflicting stories, and that pervasive fear of retaliation, the no snitching thing.
Well, investigating cases like this, it demands just painstaking attention to detail, doesn't it?
For sure.
Really skilled interviewing, especially when you're dealing with juveniles, and just a relentless push for the truth, even when you're getting inconsistent, self-serving accounts thrown at you. It also shows, again, how vital that physical evidence is to either back up or knock down what people are saying.
It also makes you think just how much fear shaped everything here. The fear of getting caught, sure, but also the fear of snitching, the fear of what others might do. It seems like it played a massive role in the terrible choices made that night and all the lies afterwards.
Absolutely. Fear is such a powerful motivator. It influences the actions during the crime itself and then drives the cover-up, the silence. It creates this climate where truth is buried and finding justice becomes that much harder.
It is definitely a lot to think about. We really encourage everyone listening to just reflect on the sheer complexity here and the ongoing search for answers and justice for Leah, Michael, and Camille.